There's a man sitting alone in a room right now. No notifications, no noise, no one asking him for anything. And he is absolutely falling apart. Not because anything bad happened, not because someone hurt him, not because his life is a disaster. He's falling apart because of the silence, because the moment the external world went quiet, the internal world got loud. And what he heard inside that silence, the self-doubt, the restlessness, the creeping sense that he was somehow behind everyone else who seemed to be out there living, it was unbearable. So he picked up his phone. And just like that, the silence was gone. Here's what nobody is telling you about that moment. That man didn't lose to loneliness. He lost to himself. And if you've ever sat alone in a room, genuinely alone, without distraction, and felt that pull, that discomfort, that almost physical need to reach for something, then this video is going to change the way you understand yourself. Because what I'm about to show you isn't a productivity hack. It isn't some motivational trick about embracing the grind. This is a 2,000-year-old operating system, field-tested by men who ruled empires, survived slavery, and stared death in the face. For transforming solitude from your greatest threat into your greatest weapon. Stay with me. Let's talk about what's actually happening in your nervous system when you're alone. Because this isn't a character flaw. This isn't weakness. This is biology. And the Stoics understood it centuries before neuroscience could name it. Here's the science. Your brain has what researchers call a default mode network. A set of neural regions that activate specifically when you are not focused on an external task. When you stop scrolling. When the meeting ends. When the house gets quiet. The default mode network is sometimes called the self-referential network. Because in those quiet moments, your brain turns its full processing power inward. It starts asking questions. Am I enough? Am I behind? Does any of this matter? Do people actually respect me? For most men, this is the most dangerous place in the world. Not a battlefield, not a boardroom. A quiet room with no distractions. Because we were never trained to sit with those questions. We were trained to answer them with action, with achievement, with the validation of other people's eyes on us. And this is where the modern world has done something almost criminal to the male psyche. It has made constant external stimulation so available, so instant, so frictionless, that millions of men have never once learned to tolerate their own company. Think about that. You spend more time with yourself than with anyone else on the planet. Every waking hour, every moment between tasks, every night before sleep, you are there. And if you can't stand being with yourself, you are never truly at rest. There's a psychological term for what happens when we avoid that inward discomfort. Experiential avoidance. The chronic habit of escaping internal states, anxiety, emptiness, boredom, self-doubt, by flooding the senses with external input, social media, background TV, endless podcasts, constant busyness, not because any of it is truly enjoyable, but because silence asks questions you don't want to answer. And here's the cost nobody calculates. Every time you escape the silence, you train your nervous system to be more fragile in it. Every scroll is a vote against your own capacity to be alone. Every distraction widens the gap between you and yourself. Until one day, you realize you can't focus. You can't sit with an idea long enough to develop it. You can't be alone in a room without a screen in your hand. And you call it loneliness. But it isn't loneliness. It's self-estrangement. And the Stoics had a cure. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man on earth. He commanded the Roman Empire at its height, millions of subjects, endless military campaigns, the political machinery of an entire civilization running through him. And yet, in the Meditations, the private journal he never intended for anyone to read, he wrote words that should stop every man cold. Confine yourself to the present. The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius wasn't writing philosophy for an audience. He was writing it to himself. He was a man who understood something rare, that the most important conversation you will ever have is the one you have in solitude, with your own mind. The Stoics had a word for this practice: prosoche. It means attention to self, vigilant, disciplined, continuous self-observation, not navel-gazing, not rumination, not the anxious self-interrogation of the default mode network running wild. Prosoche is structured inner attention, the practice of turning inward with intention rather than with avoidance. Now consider Epictetus, born a slave, no political power, no wealth, no freedom of movement. And yet, Epictetus became one of the most psychologically unbreakable men in recorded history, because he mastered something no master could take from him: the interior world. He said, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." In other words, the man who is dependent on external conditions for his inner peace is always a slave. The free man, truly free, is the one who has built a sanctuary inside himself that no circumstance can breach. This is what the Stoics called hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the command center of the self, the inner citadel. And here is the brutal truth. You cannot build the inner citadel in noise. You cannot find your hegemonikon while scrolling. You cannot develop prosoche while running from discomfort. The inner citadel is built in solitude, brick by brick, silence by silence. And then there is Seneca, perhaps the most psychologically modern of the three. Seneca understood human nature with a sharpness that still cuts today. He wrote, "Retire into yourself as much as you can. Associate with those who will make a better man of you." Notice what he said. Retire into yourself, not retreat from the world permanently, not become a hermit. Retire into yourself, meaning make solitude your base of operations. Make it the place you return to, the place that restores you, the place where you do your most essential work. This is the distinction that changes everything. Loneliness is being alone and wishing you weren't. Solitude is being alone and using it. The lonely man is a prisoner of his own company. The Stoic practitioner is a sovereign in it. So how do you actually build this? How do you transform painful solitude into sovereign solitude? I'm going to give you a framework I call the 3 chambers, drawn directly from Stoic practice, but engineered for the modern man who works alone, thinks alone, or simply finds himself more alone than he expected. Chamber 1, the chamber of clarity. The Seneca hour. The first chamber is what I call the Seneca hour. Seneca wrote Epistolae Morales, his letters, in the early morning hours, alone, before the noise of Roman life consumed the day. He wasn't journaling for therapy. He was thinking on paper, using solitude as a crucible to refine his understanding of what mattered and what didn't. Here's your practice. Every day, before you open any device, before the phone, before the laptop, before any human contact, you take one uninterrupted hour alone with your own mind and a blank page. You write 3 things. First, what is true right now, without narrative? Not what you fear is true, not what you wish were true. What is actually true about your situation, your work, your life? Seneca called this rerum inspectio, the inspection of things as they are. Second, what is within your control today? The Stoics called this the proheresis, the domain of genuine choice. Your effort, your response, your attention, your character, not the outcome, the input. Third, what would the best version of you do in this day if no one was watching? That last question is the one most men avoid, because most men are performing for an audience that isn't even there. The Seneca hour strips the performance away. It forces you to sit with the unperformed self, the self that doesn't need applause, the self that can work in silence, because the work itself is the point. Do this consistently for 30 days, and your relationship with solitude will transform at a neurological level. The default mode network, which was your enemy, becomes your laboratory. Chamber 2, the chamber of depth, the Marcus Protocol. The second chamber is about work. Specifically, it's about how to do deep work alone without burning out or drifting. Marcus Aurelius ran an empire, and he understood something about sustained cognitive effort that modern productivity culture completely misses. Deep work is not a sprint. It is a sustained state of deliberate presence. Here's the Marcus Protocol. 3 rules for working alone without degrading into scattered, lonely busy work. Rule 1. Anchor to purpose before you begin. Marcus opened his sessions of work not by diving immediately into tasks, but by first orienting himself to why this work mattered. He reminded himself of his role, his duty, his contribution. Before any deep work session, write 1 sentence. Today, I am building toward, because you're hot, not vague, specific, the project, the person it serves, the larger arc. This is what neuroscientists now call implementation intention, and it has been shown to more than double task completion rates. Marcus called it duty to logos, purpose aligned with reason. Rule 2. Define the session boundaries with precision. Lonely work expands to fill undefined time. It becomes a gray, formless fog that slowly suffocates motivation. Stoic practice is defined by what Epictetus called clear demarcation, knowing exactly where your effort begins and ends. Set a timer. 90 minutes, full presence, no device, no switching. When the timer ends, stop, walk, breathe, return to your body. The session had a beginning and an end. That structure is what transforms aimless solitary hours into the architecture of something meaningful. Rule 3. Witness yourself without judgment. This is the most Stoic rule and the hardest. Marcus Aurelius, in the Meditations, repeatedly caught himself in cognitive distortions, anger, vanity, self-pity, and simply noted them. Without self-flagellation, without excessive self-congratulation. Just, I notice this. I am choosing something different. When you work alone and hit resistance, the pull to distract, the sudden conviction that you're wasting your time, the urge to check what everyone else is doing. Don't fight it. Name it. Then return. Psychologists call this diffusion, creating cognitive distance from the thought so it loses its command over behavior. Marcus Aurelius was practicing diffusion 2,000 years ago in the margins of a leather-bound journal before any of us were born. Chamber 3. The chamber of connection, the Epictetus balance. Here is where most Stoic-adjacent content fails you. It tells you to go inward, build the inner citadel, embrace solitude, and then leaves you there, alone, proud of your isolation, calling it strength when it's actually avoidance with better branding. Epictetus would have none of it. He taught extensively on what the Stoics called oikeiosis, natural affiliation, the human being's irreducible orientation toward others. The fact that we are social animals at the level of our biological design, and that denying this in the name of Stoic self-sufficiency is not wisdom. It is pride dressed as philosophy. The goal is not to need people in order to function. The goal is to choose people from a place of fullness rather than desperation. Here's the Epictetus balance. Solitude is where you fill up. Community is where you pour out. If you are going to people seeking validation, stimulation, distraction, or rescue from yourself, you are bleeding into connection rather than contributing to it. But if you come to connection already full, already clear about who you are, what you value, what you're building, then every conversation is an exchange between two sovereign selves. That is real connection. That is what the Stoics meant when they talked about friendship as the highest good, not the anxious clinging of two lonely people, but the chosen union of two complete ones. Practically, structure your solitude and your connection. Schedule your deep work, your Seneca hours, your silent mornings, with the same discipline you'd give a client meeting, and schedule your human contact with equal intentionality. Not reactive, not just whoever happens to ping you. Chosen, purposeful, reciprocal. The man who can do both, work in true solitude and move in genuine community, is nearly impossible to destabilize, because he is never dependent on either one. I want to leave you with something that goes deeper than any framework. There's a reason the greatest thinkers in history, not just the Stoics, but Darwin, Newton, Kafka, Thoreau, Tesla, did their most important work in near total solitude. It wasn't just about focus or productivity. It was about identity formation. Here's what I mean. When you are constantly surrounded by other people, their opinions, their reactions, their versions of you, you are constantly being shaped from the outside. You absorb their expectations. You perform for their perception. You unconsciously calibrate who you are to who they need you to be. The Stoics called this fantasia, the impressions that bombard the mind from external reality. The problem wasn't the impressions themselves. The problem was mistaking them for truth. Solitude is the only environment where the impressions go quiet long enough for you to hear what's underneath them. To ask, who am I when no one is watching? What do I actually value as opposed to what I've been performing? What work would I do if the audience disappeared? These are not comfortable questions, but they are the defining questions. The man who never asks them never truly knows himself, and the man who doesn't know himself can be manipulated, destabilized, and redirected by anyone with a strong enough pull on his attention. Solitude is not loneliness. Solitude is the practice of becoming undeniable to yourself, of building an inner life so clear, so grounded, so deeply inhabited, that the noise of the world becomes interesting rather than threatening. Marcus Aurelius sat alone in a tent on the Germanic frontier, commanding armies, watching men die, carrying the weight of an empire. And he wrote quietly, in the dark, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." That sentence was not written for us. It was written for himself, alone, in the silence. And it has outlasted the empire, the armies, and every distraction Rome could offer. That is what solitude produces in a man who uses it. Not loneliness, permanence. Here's what I want you to do right now. And I mean right now, before you close this tab or get pulled into the next thing. Leave a comment below and finish this sentence. The last time I was truly alone with no distractions, I felt. One word, one sentence, whatever is true. Because here's what happens when you do that. You practice prosoche. Right now, in this comment section, you perform a micro-act of Stoic self-inspection. You name what's real. And naming it is the first step toward owning it. I read every comment. And the answer you give might become the topic of the next video. If this video hit something real in you, if some part of you recognized the man in that quiet room, share it with one person who needs it. Not because the algorithm needs your help, but because that man in your life deserves this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. Because every week on this channel, we go here. Deep, uncomfortable, real. No performance, no hype. Just philosophy that was built to survive 2,000 years and still works. I'll see you in the next one.